Let's talk to Einat Wilf, who is a former Israeli MP and aid expert and co-author of War of Return. Einat, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here on TalkTV. What do you think of the idea of a disaster emergency committee fund matched by British taxpayers' money for Gaza as a concept, as an idea?
There is actually no way to ensure that any aid goes into Gaza and that it doesn't serve Hamas. So people who are saying we're going to deliver aid of any kind, we're going to deliver money of any kind, and we're going to make sure that it doesn't serve the wrong people, they're telling themselves a story, maybe in order to not tell the truth, that they actually don't mind giving money to Hamas. But there's no situation where it's possible to give aid into Gaza that is not used for Hamas and for the building of the war machine. And this has been true for years, if not decades.
Because we look at you're the expert, absolutely. I want you to elucidate this point for me. But there's been lots of aid given to Hamas by lots of different countries previously, and they haven't built hospitals, they haven't built schools, they haven't built roads, they haven't served their people, they haven't sorted out the water supply, they haven't sorted out electricity. In fact, they've dug up water pipes and use them to launch missiles. Hamas don't care about their people, but they are nonetheless in charge. And if we want to help the innocent civilians, the people who may or may not support Hamas, hopefully they don't, there are many people living under conditions they don't want to live under, how do we even begin to do that without Hamas getting involved, or is it just impossible?
So under the present conditions, it's impossible, and it should be recognized as impossible, and people should not tell fairy tales about what could be done. But this is an issue that goes back years, and you were right to talk about the fact that billions of dollars of aid and material were placed into Gaza over the decades and the years, and they have all been requisitioned and used and diverted in order to create the war machine that we saw basically attack Israel in the most brutal way on October 7th. And the reason is, unfortunately, that it's not just Hamas. It's the fact that the vast majority of the people who live in Gaza consider Gaza not as a home that they want to develop and to turn into an example of prosperity and what it looks like when Palestinians finally control territory. They're interested in using Gaza literally as a launch pad to take back in their mind Palestine from the river to the sea. So when this is the mindset of the vast majority of the people, any dollar that goes into Gaza will never reconstruct Gaza. It will always go into building tunnels and to investing in war. So what needs to happen, and that's a much taller order, but we need to understand that this is the essential element. What needs to happen is that the people of Gaza need to understand that the world wants to help them. It wants to help them build a better future. But for that, they need to come out and say clearly, we are done thinking that we should liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. We only want to build Gaza. We have no other demands. We do not demand to settle inside Israel.
I think I basically agree with almost everything you're saying, Einat. But I think there are people who see the suffering that is happening in Gaza. There's lots of suffering happening in Israel as well, especially those families who are dealing with the 239 hostages that have been taken by Hamas terrorists. There are people who see on the news that there are very, very desperate people who have nothing to do with Hamas, who have nothing to do with terrorism, who are living in Gaza. Is there any way to help them? Is there any way? I mean, the Disasters Emergency Committee, I'm sure, would say, well, look, you know, we have organisations like the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, lots of different humanitarian organisations through the UN and so on that could perhaps get aid to people, get it perhaps across the Rafah crossing. Yes, perhaps with the assistance of Hamas, because they run Gaza, and I don't want them to be involved at all, but that's the realistic point, and actually some people could hypothetically be helped, and maybe that is something that is actually worth it.
Again, unfortunately, it's not a message I'm happy to give, but I am committed to letting people know what's actually going on.
Sure.
There are no organizations in Gaza that are not subjected to Hamas. And again, the problem is much broader. You have an entire people who are committed to the idea that it is their goal to liberate Palestine from the river to the sea. And therefore, any dollar, any cement that goes into Gaza goes into the building the war machine. If people really want to help Palestinians, if they're genuine about it, if they want to actually do good rather than feel good about themselves, if they want to really do good, they need to let Palestinians know that the investment, the money, the help will come once Palestinians rise up to say, enough is enough. We're done with our century-long battle to ensure that the Jews do not have a state.
But what about, I know exactly where you're coming from, but what about the people who are dying at the minute?
If you want to ensure that no more people die, the reason that people are dying right now is because so many people lied to themselves for the last few years. I have piles and piles of essays and op-eds and books that I wrote to say, if you're going to give money to Gaza now, and I've said it for years, and you're not going to do anything to change the mindset that says that Gaza is the launch pad from which Palestinians will liberate Palestine, there will only be more war and more suffering.
So actually that's a message to the international community. This is not just about people, and if there were to be a disasters emergency committee and people give what they can, whether that's £5, £10, £20, they're actually trying to, that in itself is not going to undo all the bad work of, as you say, the billions of dollars that have been given often by nation states, often by, I'm sure, well-meaning nation states, but actually that money, as we know, has gone into the equipment, the infrastructure of terrorism.
Precisely. And it will continue to do so unless we address the core ideology of from the river to the sea. Yeah. Only once this ideology is confronted could any aid money be fruitfully used to create a prosperous Palestinian entity.